Okay, I've decided to do a video, and the subject is about movie critics and why, in general, I don't bother them anymore. Now, many years ago, when it came to movies in general, I used to, back before obviously the internet was prominent. When it came to movie reviews, I used to obviously you could look for newspapers and magazines for people's opinions depending on the actual the magazine company it was that was reviewing it, their particular movies, and obviously there was loads of them. Now it's all like digital now, so you can look on YouTube, you can look on the internet for movie reviews, etc, etc, etc. Now, one of the things that I started to realize about movie reviews is that, again, is that it's subject to a person's opinion of it. And one of the things of late now, that kind of which put me off reviews is when some of these people get to see um, movie movies early, and obviously they can't obviously give you a proper review of it because they're under embargo. And one of the things that I've started to notice of late, maybe the last 2 3 years, is they'll come out of movie A, and obviously they can't give you a full blown review of that particular movie because they're under embargo. But what I found really strange is that they would then paint the, a picture of that the movie is actually really good, and they enjoyed the movie. So again, although it's still very vague in what they're telling you, I'm thinking to myself, okay, seems like they actually like the movie and they seem to be excited, and they can't wait to give you the proper in-depth review of that particular movie once the embargo has lifted. But what I've noticed is as soon as the embargo is lifted and they do the review, of course, non-spoiler first is what they normally do, is they start crapping on the actual movie. And then telling you, oh, the movie was bad, and then it wasn't very good, and etc, etc, etc. And for me, that's kind of confusing because initially you're painting the idea to me that the actual movie is actually good. Again, it's under embargo, so you're not given a an in-depth review of it until the embargo's lifted. Because of the companies don't want you putting out full review yet. But for me, it's kind of confusing where you're painting a picture across that the movie is actually good, but then the actual full blown review of it, you don't like the actual movie and you're kind of crapping on it. So I'm confused as to which one is it, because I'm not sure if I'm missing right the picture here in how you're giving me an impression of one thing, but then you're giving me the impression of another thing, and the two things are drastically different. And I've noticed this a lot on a lot of movies, where it's kind of really confusing in terms of in terms of what they do. So and then a lot of and I've always said when it comes to movies that the best judge of character for me when it comes to reviewing any movie is yourself, because at the end of the day, we all have different tastes in what we in a movie. We all have different expectations in what we want from a movie. We all have different ideas of what we find entertaining. Some movies you can switch your brain off and just enjoy it for what it is. Some movies, you have various different things of what you kind of get from a movie, and everybody's individual tastes in what they get from a movie is going to be different. And at the end of the day, the difference between, like, for example, when I review movies on my YouTube channel, I do pros and cons. I don't do like review scores, as I've explained before why, because obviously review scores can kind of change. But I've always stated that at the end of the day, that it's always my opinion and what I feel about a movie. So the difference between me and say a big YouTuber or a big review that may make money of it is that they're just being paid to express their opinion on a movie, whereas I'm just expressing what my opinion of a movie, but I'm not being paid to do so. And for me, when I do my reviews of a particular movie, especially if it's a movie that I like, and especially if it's a classic movie, for example, let's say like Back to the Future or like Ghostbusters or Die Hard, it's movies that I've really grown up on. I mean, obviously it shaped my childhood, or movies like Superman, as you can see there. I'm gonna sit there and be more passionate about my thoughts of the actual movie, because especially, for example, if it's a genre of movie that I like. So for example, superhero movies, where I am obviously I grew up with comics and I'm a big comic collector, and I still am now. So my passion, I'm going to be a lot more passionate with superhero films. You break it down even further, depending on that particular superhero. So let's say, for example, as we got there, Superman, where Superman, especially the Christopher Reeve's version of Superman, was a big part of my childhood. So if I was reviewing, say, the original Superman, the movie, again, if I did a review of that particular movie, I'm going to be a lot more passionate about that movie than somebody that maybe didn't grow up in that era of the Christopher Reeves Superman movies, or maybe even somebody that doesn't even like superhero films, but he's just reviewing a movie and they're not really kind of into it. So you're going to get different levels of passion from the way that you're articulating what you feel about the particular movie. I just did a day or two ago of a review of the Batman '89 movie, and that review was quite long simply because of the fact that I was explaining my when that movie first came out, and then the passion of when that movie came out, and what I was doing around that era, and the certain memorabilia around that came out around that movie. And compared to what they do with movies now, the way they've they kind of advertised, and the way the memorabilia, it's not the same as it was back in my younger days. So and I kind of do miss that with movies. So my passion for the Batman '89 movie, when you hope, which you will see, which I don't know if it will be uploaded before or after this video, you'll see, and hopefully people will see and hear my passion about that particular movie. Maybe, and I might even do a review of the original Superman movie. And again, it's all about passion. And I think some of it as well is, I think it's, for me, it's to do with the age of the reviewers that are actually doing their particular movies. So if it's for example, a superhero movie, for example, and then you've grown up all your life being a hardcore comic book fan, I feel that if somebody like for example, use myself as a template, is doing a review on superhero films, and I've grown up with comics all my life, you're gonna tend to sit there and get more of a passion when it comes to in terms of articulating what I feel about that superhero movie, than somebody that necessarily it isn't, or does reviews generic movies. Another thing that I've seen with movie reviews is the total inconsistency in terms of the review, in terms of breaking the actual review down of the actual movie. And this also kind of sidelines into video games as well, because it's the same principle. So for example, I can't remember what film it was, but this was on IGN. They were reviewing a particular movie, and then they were saying about the third act, the last act, the third act of the movie. And then they said that the third act of the last act of the movie, you could see that the CGI wasn't very great, and in places of it looked a bit rubbery. It didn't look realistic. So then what they did was that they marked down the movie, which again is their opinion. It's a person's opinion in terms of is it enough where it takes you out of the movie? Again, objectives are subjective, so that's their view. But then I've seen them review another movie, same problem in a sense of the last act of the movie, third act of the movie, where it had problems with CGI, which they rightfully brought it up, and you've got to be honest. But then they didn't mark it. But then this didn't factor into the score, where the CGI was there were issues with the CGI in the last act of the movie. And to me, that doesn't make sense, because you can't review another film. Again, I know films can be reviewed by different reviewers, and I think that's another problem as well. And again, I find this a bit silly, because you can't review another movie and mark it down because the CGI affected the movie in one part of the film. But then review another movie, same issue, but then that doesn't factor into the score. To me, that's inconsistent. And it's the same thing I've noted again with IGN, for example, with video games, where I know that with video games now, they can be patched, later on if the game's been released full of, bugs and issues here and there, and then obviously they can release patches down the line to improve the gameplay of the actual game. But I've seen them review video games, and then say, for example, that this game's had bugs here and there in parts of the game. Again, it's different to whether or not the actual bugs are game breaking, where it spoils your experience. That's a whole different ball game. And then they've marked down the game because bugs that have affected the performance of the actual video game, which is fair enough. Which means fair enough. But then I've seen them do it with another game. Again, same issues, where there's problems with bugs affecting the performance of the game. But then it doesn't affect the score of the actual game. Again, to me, that doesn't make any sense. Now, again, for me, if I was reviewing a game and it had bugs, problems in the game, and the developers are then aware of the problems that are affecting the performance of the game, for me, what I would do is I would do an update, especially if they do multiple patches. I would do several updates in saying whether or not this now improves the actual game, or maybe there's a whole lot of set of bugs, or maybe it makes the game better, or it makes the game worse. And then either you would up your score, keep the score the same, or maybe you would change the score of the game. So that's what I would do, and that's just me just being honest. But yeah, that's the problem that I have with a lot of movie critics, because they're selling you the idea initially that the movie in question is actually going to be good, and they come out of it really enjoying it, and you're going to be amazed, and it's breathtaking, etc., etc., etc. And then after the embargo lifts, they're telling you a completely different story as to, oh, the movie wasn't very good, oh, it was disappointing, blah, 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 blah. So I'm confused. Which one is it? And to me, I don't know what's kind of going on. I mean, I'm only hypothesizing as to why they're doing this. Is it because, for example, that obviously that they're getting to see the movies early, so if they don't sit there and say, they kind of come across that they're being positive about the movie, that they're not going to be allowed to see early access of that particular movie from that particular distributor ever again. So then you have to sit there and then play it safe by saying, yeah, the movie was really good, like they enjoyed it, so you're playing it safe. And then once the movie or embargo lifts, then you can sit there and then just crap on the actual movie. For me, I don't understand that at all. And again, as I said, I'm seeing that a whole lot more often now when it comes to movie reviews. And for me, from my again, this is my opinion, it's just very confusing, because just like you've been sold, two different viewpoints, or as if you've been sold two different versions of a movie, which I know sometimes they can edit and do extra stuff in the final version of that movie. But to me, it's still confusing. And that for me is why I don't bother with movie critics anymore, and it's the same thing with TV shows now. And as I said earlier on in this video, the best critic in reviewing something and analysing something is you. And I've noticed that as I've got older, that's what I've started to do. I've thought myself, you know what? Somebody sat there and said, or especially if you get a mixed review where half the people critics are saying the movie is bad, and another set of critics saying that the movie is good. So which one is it? I am another example before I sign off is with the Super Mario Brothers animated movie that came out. Again, I'm not going to give my review of it because I haven't seen the movie yet, and once I do, I'll give you my thoughts on the actual movie. But from the little glances that I had of the actual review, it was pretty obvious that although it was for me that the movie was made for, it was made for a mixture of different audiences. So, you've got the children who are into animation. You've also got a lot of the people maybe that grew up on Super Mario Brothers, like myself, that grew up on the video games as a child, and then from what I've heard, there's a lot of nostalgia where there's certain elements from the different Mario games that have been released through the Mario history and musical motifs that are played through the movie. So for somebody like me, I'm going to spot all the Easter eggs and cameos of characters and certain landscapes and music from the different Mario games. But then I noticed that there was a lot of movie critics that basically hated it, or they either didn't like it or they didn't understand it because they never really grew up on the Mario games, so they kind of didn't get it. So then they were hating it just because they didn't kind of get it. And I was kind of really shocked about that. So they were downscoring it simply because of the fact that they didn't understand the nostalgia with the actual, what was going on throughout the actual movie. And for me, that's kind of really kind of stupid. And for me, if you're going to do like a proper unbiased, honest review of a movie like that, for me, for something like that, it will be better to get somebody that that's probably into animation, that that's experienced in watching animated movies, and also maybe has children, that they may watch, and they've watched probably like movies like Toy Story with their children, and then enjoyed watching that particular animated movie with their from the child's perspective, and then from their perspective. And also, for example, use the Mario as example, is that maybe that you've kind of grown up with a history of enjoying and playing all the Mario games, which then would better suit giving you a better fit to understanding the actual movie itself, rather than people or somebody that doesn't understand it whatsoever. Same thing applies with video games, depending on the genre of video games, whether it's horror or platform or puzzle or RPGs for argument's sake, or fighting games. Get somebody, for example, that that has a history of that's good at playing fighting games. So they're giving, say, people that may not be sold on that particular video game a kind of a understanding, so that you can relate to that particular review and think, I see where they come from because they're like me. In say for example, I like Street Fighter games and the Mortal Kombat games and Tekken, and I've got a history of growing up with these games in the arcade and on the consoles, whether it's the Super Nintendo, the PlayStations, or the present or current gen. And then they've grown up on those video games. So then when I'm watching their reviews and breakdowns of that particular of that video game, I can then relate to it. So, for example, you've got YouTubers like Maximilian Dude, who seems very knowledgeable in the Street Fighter games and the Mortal Kombat games and the Tekken games.
So then when he's for example giving you like a breakdown of the new games that have been released in that series, I can relate to what he's actually putting across, or what he's actually saying. And that sometimes I think is missing with these movies, is that you can't relate to a lot of these movie critics, especially when they're kind of hating things because they don't understand it, or they're overly nitpicking the particular movie, and in some cases biased on, or wanting a movie to fail. So yeah, so with me wrapping up this video, this is the reason why, for me, why I don't tend to bother with movie critics anymore. Again, as I said before, if somebody agrees or disagrees with my movie reviews, or video game reviews, or food reviews, that to me is perfectly fine, because what I'm saying isn't gospel. It's just my opinion, and I will state that categorically, 100%, that it's just my opinion. So as I said before, with anything in life, the best thing you can do, as I said before, with anything, is to judge something for yourself.